So Ev was with us last year. For those of you who came, we did an interview with Padma Shri Warrior, who's actually going to be appearing later today as well. And he talked a little bit, I think, about Obvious, the latest exploration or latest project. But we're going to learn a little bit more about what they've been doing at the company. So we've called this Mindfully Building a Company from the Ground Up. And I want to welcome Jonathan and Ev to the stage. And we'll also have some time for questions in this session. So we're planning about the last 10 minutes. So if you have a question that's really burning, there'll be a chance to come up and potentially ask that. I don't know how many people have questions, but potentially you'll have a chance to ask that question. So if you notice a question emerge, try not to fixate on it the whole time we're talking, otherwise you're going to miss the whole rest of the session. But just note it, and we'll see if we can come back around to it later on. So Eva, it's going to start with you. And so when I first started exploring, this whole issue within the tech world about wisdom and mindfulness, it was a little challenging to find people in the tech world who I thought would be interested in this. So then when I heard that more and more kind of tech community folks were like open to this or interested in this, it got really exciting for me. And so I'd love to start just by how the kind of word mindfulness or how this whole kind of area of wisdom became an interest of yours. Whether it's a new thing, an old thing, or something in between.
It's an old thing for me, although fairly new in actually putting it more into practice regularly. I have just in reading, mostly in reading. I mean, I grew up in the cornfields of Nebraska. There weren't a lot of Zen centers or anything around. I think my first introduction to meditation was listening to Wayne Dyer tapes when I was like, that my dad bought.
That's like a teenager?
Yeah, probably early 20s. He was an enlightened farmer. And
of which there are many, I think.
Trying to be, yeah. But, that was just a passing interest and dipped into it here and there over the years, but mostly spent the last couple decades heads down, typical tech, working constantly, computer, brain, mindset, and then I just started getting old, I guess. I mean, wise.
So in terms of the impact of that lifestyle, feeling like you're just getting overwhelmed and looking then to say, like, all right, how do I find balance and within this context?
Yeah, I mean, with the last few years running Twitter, of course, that was as crazy as crazy gets in startup world. And I think I was lucky that didn't happen in my 20s, or else it would have been, I don't think I would have handled it as well, but I was able to stay somewhat balanced. And then stepping away from that, I definitely understood why a lot of people don't go back and try to do it again. I mean, I think there's this very common reaction like, okay,
I did that.
That was good. Now I'm going to spend time with my kids and helping other people. And that's admirable and great. But I didn't think that'd be particularly satisfying. But so I thought the only alternative is, if I want to still build companies and have impact and do big things in the world, is to find a way to do it that is more sustainable, more balanced. And so that was definitely a goal from the beginning of this company.
That if you're going to work at a company and going to grow a company, you're going to grow it in a way that you want to come to work each day and where people feel nurtured and supported.
Absolutely. And really just with the optimistic belief that wasn't a trade-off, that there was a new way of being and approaching this stuff that was going to be beneficial and be more productive and lead to more success, as well as being more fun and more sustainable.
Great. So there's a win-win potential versus
absolutely
burn yourself to the ground and hope for the best.
Right.
Right. And I'm curious, what were some of your first initial conversations? So you're going to start the company, and then you, for some reason, call Jonathan or connect up with Jonathan to begin to explore some of the culture aspects. Does one of you remember how that started?
Yeah, I started talking to Jonathan before, actually when I was, I think still technically at Twitter, trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and someone introduced us, and he would just, first of all, was helping me think that through, but what do you recall?
Well, what I recall is you did this really interesting experiment, which was, can I be a ski bum?
Which was what?
Can I be a ski bum?
Okay, can I be a ski bum?
And that was kind of predictable, that wasn't your nature.
Turns out I'm not good at skiing.
Oh, yeah. And, but you are good at building companies. And so you're back in San Francisco, and we started talking about two things. What kind of company did you want to build? And of particular interest to me, what kind of community did you want to build in the service of that? And a place where you could have work-life balance, where you would feel connected to everybody who was working there, and that we could we could really try and solve this super interesting problem, which is how to get people in a place where they're in the flow, they're very productive, they're having fun, they're creative, and best of all, they're really engaging each other and bringing out the best in each other.
Yeah.
With the idea that, it gets so productive that people can then have, quote unquote, in the popular variants, work-life balance, where you're getting enough done during the day that you can be with your family, you can do other things that are important to you.
Yeah.
And sustain that over a long period of time.
Yeah. And so how's the experiment going? I mean, what are you trying? I know that you've included something called Holacracy, which I'd love for you to mention a little bit about how that systemically. And I know it's still very young and very early, and you're not here to tout that you've somehow mastered this question. But I'd be curious to just learn a little bit about what some of your current explorations are. What are some of the things you're trying that seem to be positive, whether it's connecting people one-on-one to have conversations at lunch or classes or programs or...
Yeah.
I'll talk about Holacracy first. I mean, that's a really big thing and probably the most foundational thing for how we run the company. I don't know how many people have heard of Holacracy, but I was introduced to it by David Allen, GTD David Allen, and a couple years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I was just chatting with him and talking about how he runs his company, and he had just been introduced probably 6 months prior to this idea of Holacracy at the Conscious Capital conference, and I think the Holacracy guys are
they're
here.
around.
And he started telling me about this idea, and first of all, Holacracy is a weird sounding thing, and it was kind of hard to wrap my head around, but David Allen, who I respected a ton and just found to be incredibly smart and wise, was just swearing by it. He's like, look, I know it sounds weird, but we've implemented it, I've tried to poke holes in it, and I love it. It works. I can't imagine going back to running a company in the old way. And so Holacracy is always, it's kind of hard to sum up, but they call it an operating system for organizations, and it's based on a set of philosophies that are backed up by specific processes and structure that help you run the company in a way that I think creates, I would compare it to GTD, which a lot of people are familiar with. Yeah, in that it creates a very specific structure that actually allows people a lot more creativity and freedom because of that structure.
Right, and so there's a clear set of ground rules in terms of what everyone's jobs are and expectations are, and there's a certain autonomy, right, in each person.
It's kind of the opposite of the cliched way to run a startup or do a small company, in that people think, oh, freedom and no job descriptions, and everybody does everything and it's totally flat, and that's cool because we're all just gonna down with those rules. But actually that creates tons of anxiety and inefficiency and various modes of dysfunction, whether it's we have to build consensus around every decision, or I'm going to do a land grab for power, and it kind of sucks. I mean, people romanticize startup cultures, but I know it's fairly rare that people in startups like, this is actually amazing, and everybody's super productive and gets along. And so Holacracy, one of the principles is to make the implicit explicit. So it's just a ton of it is about creating clarity. And it's like, who's in charge of what, who's making what kind of decisions, and but there's also a system for defining that and changing that, so it's very flexible at the same time.
Cool.
And hand in hand with the making the implicit explicit, there are very specific rules which arguably engender something called mindfulness. And my favorites are, somebody's proposing something and you aesthetically don't like it, or you think you have a better idea. That's irrelevant.
That's irrelevant.
That's irrelevant. And you have to ask yourself some questions. Will this proposal harm the company or set the company back? In which case, absolutely, you should object. But if it doesn't, those aren't grounds for objection. And then, in the mindfulness scheme of things, you're then supposed to also ask yourself, do I really think it's going to harm the company, or is that just sort of a fear that's percolating for me? And is there evidence that this is going to harm the company? So you're really challenged to say, am I being aspirational in my decision making, or am I being fear-based in my decision making? And and if there's data to support the fear, then of course you should speak up. But otherwise, let's do an experiment. Let's test this proposal and see how it runs, and get new data, and take it from there. So that's a really great rule.
One other thing, we could talk about mindfulness for this whole set, or mindfulness, or Holacracy. But one of the other...
They're actually doing a presentation, I think, at some point on the breakout.
Well, so. One quick thing that speaks to the mindfulness part is it's everybody's job to bring up what they call tensions, which are problems, concerns, or ideas or opportunities. This really appeals to me because in the past, as my companies have grown, I would hire these amazing people, and I felt like I was getting less and less of them as the company got bigger. And part of that was because they were in a particular area, and there was no way they had ideas or concerns or had perspectives that were relevant outside that area, and it wasn't clear what to do with those. And if someone has a really good manager, maybe they can route them to them, but even then, it's like, well, what does the manager do with them? And it's not necessarily expected or encouraged to mention everything. And so Holacracy provides a very specific way where people are actually encouraged to bring this stuff up. And it's called tensions, and it's processing tensions, and it's very efficient. And you get, you really take advantage of everybody's perspectives and ideas, and even if you don't accept them all, there's at least, it lowers their anxiety because there's a route to process them, and there's transparency about how it was reacted to.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, it seems, one of the things that interests me is it seems that within the tech area, a lot of the success of platforms like Twitter, for example, is you don't tell people how to be, you don't tell people what to tweet, you just give them an open platform, an open space, and they put in that box, whether it's a big box of Blogger or a small box of Twitter, they put in whatever's going on for them. So how do you create a company where you're giving people freedom of expression and freedom to be, but you're also trying to get them to be mindful, versus just allowing them to be not mindful? Because it seems that if there's too much push towards any one way of mode or being, then you're going to get a backlash, and people are going to feel a bit confined. So how do you address that? How do you introduce more of a mindful approach to a young engineering crowd who are generally pretty much like their own freedom?
Yeah, well, you can't force people to be mindful at all, turns out. And
I think that's going to be tweeted a few times, but yeah.
What I think you can do is you can make it easier to be mindful. And this relates to my perspective on everything from product design to company design, to just, we're programmed to conserve energy, is one of the basic principles I try to keep in mind. So if I want myself to do something, I make it easier to do. Make it harder to do. If I'm eating too many tortilla chips, don't buy tortilla chips. But so one thing, there's a very practical mechanism. Like we have people who come in twice a week to lead meditation sessions in the office. Obviously, it's opt-in.
Obviously.
But I mean, one of the hardest things about meditation is finding time to do it.
Yeah.
So if it's on your calendar and there's a room over there you can go sit in and someone will guide you through it, you're about 10,000 times more likely to do it than if you're sitting at your desk and there's nowhere to go and you have all this and no one to help you. Then you, and besides the fact that it communicates, hey, this is actually encouraged.
Right.
And it's encouraged not because it's a perk and we want this to be a nice, fluffy place to work, but because it makes you better and it makes the company better. And we really believe in the hard science aspects of it as well. And so that applies to everything. And Jonathan's done other things to encourage people to have conversations that they wouldn't necessarily have.
Yeah, excellent. And Jonathan, how do you see your role? I mean, generally in startups, you have engineers and designers. Someone like you generally isn't a part of the early makeup of most companies that I'm aware of, because they're just trying to get a product out the door. How do you see your role, and what's your role been in this other kind of experiment going on?
Well, my role keeps evolving, in part in response to how the company grows, in part in response to conversations that Ev and I have. But one of the things that's always fascinated me from a psych background, organization background, is all the conversations that people don't have. And people have tremendous apprehensions about talking to each other. They're like, I can see all the ways this conversation is going to go wrong. They do cost-benefit analysis, and they decide, I'm going to put this conversation off until the pain point gets bad enough that, oh, what the heck, well, I'll have the conversation. So we have resources. We have the meditation teachers, so that's a place for people to come in and develop skills. But we also, in terms of the leadership coaching that I do, in terms of the sort of peer relationships systems that we're setting up, people are constantly invited to have conversations and to take things that they've learned from Holacracy. What tensions am I feeling? Am I speaking out of fear? Am I speaking out of aspiration? And initiating conversations and discovering that they can have conversations, particularly if they slow down, they're self-reflective before they speak. And my own particular favorite thing is we have this program called peer engagement, mindful engagement.
Peer engagement?
Well, it's got multiple different names.
You can't decide what to call it.
Can't decide. But what people are telling me is they're speaking to somebody, a different person in the company who's older than them, or they're a designer, the other person's an engineer, and then they report back to me, I had no idea I had so much in common with this person.
Wow.
I had no idea that they were struggling with some of the same concerns that I am. And the theme of those concerns is, being my best self. Am I doing my best work? Am I as good a colleague as possible? That's beautiful, if you will.
Yeah.
And then when you have people identifying with each other, then all of a sudden conversations are much safer to have, and hopefully we're creating positive feedback experiences where, we're building momentum.
Yeah.
And it goes back to all this stuff is just creating space to do. You can't. People opt into that program as well, but people want to do this stuff generally, and people who don't want to, who all this turns off, they generally opt out of the company or they don't decide to join in the first place. Yeah. So you get people who are like, you give them the opportunity to have conversations they wouldn't normally have, and they're like, oh, great, cool. Love it.
Right. And what do you think, one of the questions I wasn't sure if I was going to ask of, but what motivated you to do this again? Because it seems like a lot of people who they either love the money of creating something like Twitter, that kind of motivates them, or they love like just the possible notoriety, so there's all this energy that goes into startups, right? I'm going to make a startup, I'm going to change the world. You don't need that. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to show up here, right, and talk about wisdom. You don't need more people necessarily at your website. I'm curious, what is it?
Medium.com. Please go there.
And you can't even. Can they even register now?
Sure.
They can.
Well, they can.
We didn't plan this, by the way.
And then just email your friends plus wisdom. I'm just making this up. at obvious.com. Your friends plus wisdom at obvious.com will let you
turn
post
on.
stuff.
Oh, okay. All right. We'll allow them in.
So, what was your question? Why am I doing this?
Well, I'm interested in. So, yeah, you could be doing anything right now, and you could not be here talking about mindfulness.
As I said, I'm bad at skiing.
Right. Yeah. That kind of ruins that.
No, my drive has always been to create, and at first it was I have ideas for products, and I guess I have to create a company, and that's sort of a necessary evil. I have to manage people, and that's messy, and I wish I could just do software, but I guess I'll learn how to do this so I can build products. And then I shifted my mind to, you know what, the company is kind of a product, and that's a creation as well. And then the products I gravitated toward were things that let other people create. And so it sort of has this multiplicative effect, and then that led to, actually, you know what, these things change things in the world. That's really empowering and exciting. And that's fantastic. That's a much more powerful motivation than the money or the fame. And I figured as long as I can keep doing it, I want to do it. And there's so much more to do that why not? And it's fun, and it's satisfying, and I'm learning constantly and making new mistakes every time. And
great. And it also feels like part of your gift for now. Or
that's
your
all
contribution.
I know how to do, actually.
And farming.
I was bad at that too.
Okay. So we have a little bit of time left. I believe there was going to be a mic put up. Am I mistaken? There is a mic.
There's a very short
mic. There's a very short mic with a person with a hat nearby. And if you're so inclined to come up and potentially be embarrassed and speak in public to a bunch of people, you're willing to take that risk. We just ask that it's short and to the point as much as possible. 140 characters or less, if you can.
Hi, thanks very much. Do you or John have any hints for, instead of creating the company from the ground up, transforming an already established company towards mindfulness?
Wow. Maybe John.
It's interesting that you ask that question, because part of what is so fun for me professionally right now is the privilege of being able to build it from the ground up. That is definitely a lot simpler. It starts with leadership. So leadership has to be interested in being self-aware and being open and being receptive. So if you have that leadership, but the reality is that most organizations are open to dynamic change when they're in crisis. And
create a crisis.
So yes, so you either come in crisis or you generate a crisis, and then people will try new things.
I have a tip, a very practical tip that relates to that and a bunch of other stuff. Use the phrase "I have attention," which comes from Holacracy, and Jonathan mentioned that that's informed other conversations. It's a very powerful mechanism to encourage conversations and make it possible to bring up stuff that people wouldn't otherwise. And of course, there's a technique of asking a question, but I think that's often so veiled. And it's like, are you concerned that this is a stupid idea? And but I have attention is such an honest, mindful way of bringing up what's actually going on for you that it creates mindful dialogues that otherwise wouldn't happen.
And it also creates anxiety in the other person. I have attention, but it doesn't immediately throw the other party onto the defensive.
Yeah.
Because I have attention.
Right.
Yeah. Also, Jeff Weiner from LinkedIn is going to be talking about some of his efforts on a slightly larger company at the end of the day. I think we have time for one more.
Hi,
There's like
Ev.
7 seconds.
We need. Well, next year we'll make more time.
We have
2
5
hours.
and a half minutes.
How many questions? How many answers?
We'll be
Actually,
fast.
we'll stop. Go. Move it through.
All right. Ev, I wanted to ask about Obvious's move into areas outside of digital in the sense of Beyond Meat and some of these other things, because I think that's really significant. We're here about wisdom in the digital age, but how does this stuff affect every other industry, every other kind of business? That's pretty interesting. So.
Yeah, we have a few investments outside of the internet, and mostly just things that Biz and I or Jason got really enthused about, and we thought we could help. So Beyond Meat is our largest, actually. It's an alternative meat product. We just wanted to support it, and it tastes fantastic, and it's and it doesn't have all kinds of bad effects that meat does. So, all this relates to everything, but in that case, we're just trying to help things that we want to succeed in the world.
Whether it's tech or not tech.
Yes.
Yeah. So Ev's right. We do have more time.
Very cool. So I'm from a company similarly structured to Obvious. This is really fascinating. You said you kind of came to wisdom because you got old. How?
If you're over 30 in the tech world, you're pretty old. Yeah.
Well, I find that happening to me as well. And actually, this is my intention is to find out how to bridge to younger people. How have you found to do that in your hiring? I know you have some younger people. Especially, and a lot of them are probably critical thinkers. They're really good at picking things apart versus plussing. So how have you been able to do that?
I don't know. I mean, if you talk to the younger people in our company, I don't know if they'll tell you that I've made them wise or seen any light. I mean, they're energetic, young people who are super smart, and I don't know if any of this is relevant to them at all. Jonathan probably has a better idea.
Well, aging is a wonderful thing. So there's exhaustion and you are more motivated. How can I develop myself? How can I be my best self? And I think that has a little less relevancy to people in their early 20s. And I have noticed that the participation is higher the older you are, the more you're likely to be in the room doing the meditation. But I've also noticed that the younger people are watching the older people and going, there might be some value in this, and checking it out more. Yeah. So, and part of the spirit of
They're
opting
certainly
in.
more likely to than if it's not going on at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. The people at our company are really curious, and they want to be as effective as they can be. And if they see something that seems helpful and useful to them, why not give it a try?
Osmosis. That's the hope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, pretty much answered my question. Thanks.
Wow.
Hi, Michelle Vendelin. So you talk about providing guided meditation a couple of times a week, I guess, actually in the office. And I'm just curious, as part of the experiment, have you been able to actually quantify any changes or results of the time spent in the meditation? Because, coming from the tech world, and I've definitely been on the rat race for many, many years, there's some, caution in terms of, bringing this stuff into the workplace. And I'm just wondering if you've been able to develop some evidence around the effectiveness of people who participate in the meditation on site.
No. But A, it's fairly new. I mean, it's weeks old that we've been doing this. And B, we haven't tried to quantify it. We have referenced, there's been lots and lots of studies that have quantified it and others, so we don't necessarily see it as our role to duplicate scientific studies. I think it would, if we were a much larger company and once it's going on for a long time, then that would be really great. I think we might be able to show stuff like compare, but then you're like tracking if people are meditating or not, and that gets weird. So I haven't really thought about that too much. Anyone who does it, and I evangelize it because I'm like, dudes, this makes me smarter and better and more creative and happier. So I recommend it if do it or not.
We're also deliberately not doing it in a rigorous way. So we had a retreat in the fall, and part of the retreat was spending most of the day doing mindfulness-based stress reduction, learning to breathe, learning to meditate. And then we've set up these programs.
And then we played flag football.
And have a party at night.
And everything's opt-in, but we're rigorous about the opt-in. So you come one week, you don't come the next week, you join halfway through. So it doesn't lend itself to some sort of careful analysis. But we have a lot of confidence in the huge body of research that has documented the value of meditation practice.
Great.
Fair enough.
And I think with that, we just have to stay on schedule, or else bad things happen.
It's going up now.
Yeah, it's going up now. What happens is it reaches its limit and then over.
I thought we were gaining time because we were so great.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the quality of your answers changes this based on there's an algorithm that just then goes.
Now it's at 0.
There's a timer right here we can see. So it's at 0. So I want to thank both Jonathan and Ev for being here. This is Jonathan's first time, Ev. I think this is the second time. It's always great to have you guys.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.